Welcome everyone, Dr. Thor here. Get ready for Gnosis. Well, in my continuing research, and how you learn things is by reading, and not necessarily what is on the internet, even though there is a lot of good information and free information on the internet, but there's also sources of information that you can read free that are things like magazines, and magazines that are many years old. This is a big secret of doing real research. Well, what were they doing at a particular time in metaphysics? And you can get magazines from that particular day. And I found some really valuable and interesting information in old magazines. This is an old researching trick, which is quite fascinating. You can also see what books were being sold and so many other things. What was popular? Who was advertising what? It's pretty fascinating. And all this can be gained from old magazines. A lot of times you can get old magazines, many of them, like Fate magazine, inexpensively. Buy, 5, 10 at a time, and you can get them inexpensively. Now, ironically, magazines can be very expensive because they're considered rare. So if you want a magazine, you may pay $10 or $15 for it and another $5 shipping, where you can get some of these older paperbacks for a few bucks. And these are other little gems. There's an awful lot of paperbacks that were put out in the 60s, 70s, into the 80s that have strange and amazing stories in them that are based on actual non-fiction events. People talking about certain psychics and people that were popular and known even in other countries, and what exactly were they doing? This stuff is just lost and hidden, and I read these articles all the time, so I've never even heard of this person. Yet this is a story that was reported as fact, and probably it was. So much metaphysical, amazing things are happening in your society that nobody knows about. All you know about is the lying, thieving criminals who are feeding you garbage. The unamazing Randys, the great felon Brian Dunning. I'm a felon, and I'm going to tell you as the great debunker. Or the clown college graduate who seems to also have a problem with his sexuality, as little dungeons in his house, and other things that involve these people that are totally fraudulent people with absolutely no credibility whatsoever. Or his little buddy who was a high school teacher. Yeah, those are geniuses. When I need help, I go to my high school teacher and say, how do I screw a screw in a wall? I can't tell you that. I've never done it. I'm a high school teacher that teaches a dead language like Latin. Ooh, you're such a genius. So the whole idea is we run into this all the time. So how do you get information, and how do you kind of go back in time? How do you know? Well, there is tens of thousands of fantastic books that were printed from the 60s up until the middle 80s by credible good people discussing, verifying scientific discoveries in all of the, quote, psychic ESP areas. Because this is when it was open and people had a mind and they were seeking something better than, I'm a meat puppet, call me th. So the whole idea is you're a meat puppet, and then you listen to these physicists, and it makes your head swim with their ignorant talk and their basically contradictory talk. But without getting into that, let's get into a fascinating article here. Now, this little blurb was in Fate magazine, July 1969, when Fate was only 50 cents. Now, Fate's a great little magazine in general. I've advertised with them for many, many years. I may advertise with them actually again. They're a great little magazine, always a good way to get fascinating information. They always have good classifieds, ads, and a lot of fairly decent writers, even though they tend to get too many of the scumbuckets from Llewellyn. But there's good information there, and through the years they have published some of the top people in the industry. But here's a fascinating little blurb. Now, this is about a quarter of a page done by Rho Sigma. Odd name. I'm assuming this is a real dude. And it talks about who? Well, a very fascinating person who everything in physics is based on. Well, there's two people that, of course, all of physics and pretty much all of science is based on. The 500-year-old information coming from Newton. No, that's not just a cookie. It's not just a fig Newton. It is a scientist who basically all of science is based on, who also basically was an alchemist, who basically was a metaphysician, and kind of a religious weirdo, aren't they all? So the whole idea of, and of course the other person that people fall to their knees and praise like pseudo-god that they consider him, is really the rewriter, otherwise known as Albert, Einstein. Now, Albert Einstein never came up with his so-called theory of relativity, which people think is a fact. He rewrote the actual theory into something that was better understood and inventing math to make it look good. That's what Albert Einstein did. He may have done other things as well, but what he is famous for, he never wrote. He explained it that somebody else had already written. I think that's important to understand. And since science wants to give credit to everybody who except should, they want to give credit to people like Schrödinger, who was a pedophile, and of course other people who were racist and everything else, and these are things that they like to slap their names on. Now, a lot of stuff is to say, well, you should have known better. Well, you know, it's never been acceptable, even though at certain periods of time, things are more liberal, but there's always been laws against underage girls, and the old sayings, well, 14 will get you 20. This is something that has been going around for 50 years. Secondly, racism, slavery, and everything else is not a 21st century or 20th century new understanding. Slavery was outlawed by most of the world hundreds of years ago, and it still stayed in effect in racism, everything else in the United States up until the 70s, even into the 80s when it came to the poor Native Americans who had separate bathrooms even in the 70s. The Pentagon had separate bathrooms, except that apparently Roosevelt stopped that nonsense from going on. So here we go again. Everybody knows it shouldn't have been done. And just because it was common, ignorant, buffoonish attitude of the past doesn't mean that we give these people a pass. One of the problems of the world is forgiving and forgetting. You should never do that. That just allows your enemy to grow strong again and to victimize you and everyone else again. People need to grow up. And those that have done bad things, whether it's 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 10 minutes ago, need to be brought to the understanding of that. So let's get real with everything. Apparently, the boobalicious Bill Maher doesn't like the fact that we're holding standards for people that were 100 or 200 years ago. Well, we certainly should. Well, maybe we shouldn't hold his paycheck anymore, because he should get paid what people got paid in 1960. This is a boob. So, now let's talk about Albert Einstein, the Dowser. Now, this is a very interesting story. And again, we have to give some assumption that this is based in fact. Why would somebody write this? Particularly in 1969. Well, they'd write it in 1969 because of the fact this is when everybody was open to this. They had Milton Bradley, had Psychic Games, Kruskin's ESP game, and an advanced ESP game. And there probably was 10 or 15 games based in psychic powers and ESP that came out from 1968 to about 1975. Quite fascinating. So, all of this is very, very interesting. And this story is very interesting as well. So the reason something like this would be written is because there's an interest. Unamazing Randy was still in his deviant attitude wherever he was, didn't graduate high school, traveled the world tricking people, and all the things that, of course, he did that people think is wonderful. Oh, you tricked me. You took money out of my pocket so I can look like an idiot. You got a $10 magic trick that you bought at Stuckey's. So the whole idea is that these are the type of things that go on out there. So let's get into this story and let me read it. Professor Albert Einstein was an ardent and skilled dowser who showed his friends practical applications of the art of dowsing. So reports the Swiss magazine RGS, whatever that is. And remember, this is 1969, so who knows what. Which deals with such subjects as radiation biology and geopathy. So this is a scientific publication, and we have to assume that they're credible. Why would they say something like this if it wasn't credible? In a report by Emily Keitman of Tegernsee, Bavaria, Albert Einstein's friend Hermann Wolf of Bremen is quoted as saying that the celebrated scientist frequently was a guest in Wolf's parents' rural home. At one time, when he was there, they happened to be bringing up for discussion a serious problem of a hidden leakage from the huge pond in their garden. To the astonishment of his guest, Professor Einstein said he might be able to help. Taking a dowsing rod, he walked out to the pond and in a short period of time pinpointed the exact location of the underground flow that was draining the pond. Then he proceeded to teach his host the fine points of the art of dowsing. Professor Einstein taught my father, my brother, and me how to find hidden leakages with the dowsing rod. Later, I was able to locate numerous wells for my friends, Mr. Wolf said. The Swiss magazine concludes, Professor Einstein, the world-famous scientist, not only did he not ridicule dowsing, he practiced the art himself and even taught it to others. A remarkable fact indeed. So you thought all the f were all boobs and that they criticized everything, like the boobs that we have that are physicists of today. And that's all of them, from one goofball after another. If you listen to them, who try and come off sometimes as smart and not being prejudiced, slip into their books, their conversations. Neil deGrasse Tyson, Sean Goofball Monkey Man, who's now a theoretical philosophy physicist, Sean Carroll, has all discounted, criticized, and tried to debunk in any way that they possibly can with their pea brain the reality of these things. And of course, if anything is in their favor, by the way, Albert Einstein wrote several large papers on how black holes didn't exist. You don't hear that either. So there's so many things out there. And the discovery of black holes even goes back to really hundreds of years ago where the theory of that came up to. It certainly wasn't the boobs that talked about it, the sadly crippled but ignorant person who wrote all the books on black holes. So we should listen to a guy his body is riddled with disease, and we should think that he can logically totally paralyzed, can barely move, and it takes 2 hours to write a sentence, that we could possibly believe these people and their theories. Who, by the way, changed his theories from 1 year to the next. Yes, there was black holes, no, there wasn't. No information can escape. Information does escape. All the things that had been said by these bogus boobs. And all of those out there that continue to attack the higher consciousness levels of mankind, which have been proven for 150 years. But you're never going to hear that from a parapsychologist. They're too busy licking bottoms in the industry there, like they've been doing all their lives. Fortunately, most of these parapsychologists from the 60s, you're going to croak soon. Thank you. So we can get rid of these cowardice scumbuckets who've never done anything in life. So that's one of the bigger problems. And I've seen so much of this that I have absolutely no respect for parapsychologists, otherwise known as cowardice fools. So the whole idea is we need to understand it. But here's a prime example. And Albert Einstein, who said the best kind of scientist would be a metaphysician, meaning they would look at things differently, also got trapped by the fact that What could be more metaphysical than quantum physics, which he didn't want to believe in, or at least not to certain levels? I'm not entirely sure of that. He went to his grave still fighting Max Bohr and others who were pushing quantum physics. It's really sad. But here we go again. He was obviously an avid dowser, knew how to use dowsing rods, and was very accurate with it. And of course, many dowsers can point out leaks and pipes and other things. They do it all the time. These types of tools are even issued to the gas company and other people who used to find lines this way. All of this is quite fascinating and interesting of how all this goes. So what you hear today is nonsense. We always have to look back. What was written back then? An odd interest to just bring it up quickly here is Kundalini. Now, everybody believes in Kundalini, but I was reading an article published in 1973 by top people like Christopher Hill, many of the Indian researchers that were very popular back then in the United States that had big institutes, and then they said there was no such thing as Kundalini, which we think at this day and age is an established fact. Well, none of the officials back then, the top people studying this, agreed that there was Kundalini. So this, again, is a contrived situation that we don't know what is. So a lot of people bought into this, particularly because it was linked to sexual practices that pushed it down people's throats. It's all complete nonsense. We don't know as usual. Does energy flow up from your root chakra up to your crown chakra? Well, we know that happens, but is it some sort of Kundalini flow? And can this be stimulated? Well, I was able to do this at age 12, where I opened up the flow from my root chakra. Bad idea, by the way. You should always go from the down up, but that's not what the yoga is told you. It's always bring up the crap from your crotch to your head. So the whole idea is that all of this is something that we are doing that is wrong. We don't know. So it's now been an established fact because a bunch of people in the 80s wrote books on Kundalini to make money off them through bogus publishers like Weisner and Llewellyn, who have questionable moralities, working with and publishing books from known criminal Satanists. So the whole idea is they were more than happy to work with these people. So we can't give them much credibility. Nor do I give a person who's basically 800 line ends with 666. Come on, Llewellyn, what's going on with you? So the whole idea is that, and why are you giving jobs to Stephen Flowers? So all of this is part and parcel of what's going on to the known Satanist and Nazi. How nice. Such nice people. So the whole idea is that here's another known fact. Here's something that has been covered up for years because all of your pseudo-scientists, because really that's what they are. They're pseudo. They're false. They're not scientists. They're opinionated, brainwashed fools. And the whole idea is, here we go again. We know that that Einstein was into dowsing, but you're not going to hear that from anybody else. And most people were, particularly at that time, etc. Dowsing has always been big all over the world. It has always worked. And that's why it's big and still around today. And there's some amazing dowsers that can find water all the time. This was happening particularly in California in the last 5 to 15 years because there's no water in California. And people want to put in one of the most water-absorbing fruits that there is called avocados. Everybody loves them. They take a lot of water. You can't get water and it doesn't rain. You have to find it in the ground. So they've been drilling for these things, and people that have avocado ranches where they grow these things are using well water that has been found by dowsing. Another thing you don't know, that's all kept under wraps like everything else. Common practice. And by the way, this was done by a movie star, who bought Avocado Farm. I'm trying to remember her name. She's an actress. It's on the tip of my tongue. She's an older actress who was married to that motorcycle guy. Jesse, whatever his name, Jesse James. But she's been in a lot of movies in the past. I haven't seen her recently. Sandra Sarah, I'm not sure what it is, but she has an avocado ranch, and she got her water from a dowser. She stated this on The David Letterman Show. Ooh. So more made-up stuff right from the horse's mouth again. This is all contrived by Dr. Thor. This doesn't base it on anything. All the facts are there. And it's about time we have boob idiots like Neil deGrasse Tyson flapping his obnoxious, rotten personality, really just spitting out diarrhea with his pseudo-intellect. Oh, the sun's 12,000 million miles away. Oh, thank you for that fact, boob man. So yeah, you're an astrophysicist. So what you are, yeah, rocks in space, they're made of some are metal, some are plastic, some are milk cartons. Yeah, thank you. Pluto's not a planet. Oh, yeah, I'm glad. How many millions did you spend on that, Tyson? So the whole idea is that this is a big waste of time, but we have to understand where facts come from, and we have to understand those that are pushing it. But when you find out the real story, like with Albert Einstein, these people were using subtle energies. They were using things that were very checkable and verifiable, and were happy to do it, and apparently taught a bunch of other people as well. Now, this was early in his career, if we're talking about Switzerland and other things, before he left there because of the Nazis that chased him out and stole everything he had. So that was early in his life. So I don't know if he was doing anything here in America, certainly didn't write any books on that, but he knew probably best to shut his mouth, because you're going to get one of these ignoramuses from these brainwashed institutions, MIT, Caltech, who are nothing more than mental slavery for a class of the biggest boobs there are, which are the scientists who've achieved nothing. So hopefully this has cleared everything up. Another fascinating stories from the annals of history, from Dr. Thor to you.